single mothers are literally the worst parents on the entire planet. Statistics back that. Over 70% of young men that grow up under a single mother in particular, end up in prison.
So everything that this man just said is a complete lie, which means it must be time for another round of These Aren't Facts. They're just things you made up to justify your feelings. Now, the often quoted statistic is that 70% of inmates come from single mother homes, which would represent about 840,000 of the 1.2 million people incarcerated according to the Department of Justice in 2021. Meanwhile, 70% of the estimated 19 million children raised in single mother homes would be about 13 million. And I'm not sure how Aaron's defining young men, but even if we adjust for that, it would still be an absurdly wrong number. Okay, so Aaron misspoke, but what about that 70% statistic? That has to be correct, right? After all, it's repeated everywhere.
Women gotta hold themselves accountable because 70% of boys in jail are raised by single mothers.
Single sisters are to blame for the high population of men in jail.
70% of youth in juvenile delinquent facilities come from single mother homes.
80% of all youths in prison are from single mother homes.
If you compare a single mother, is 80% chance of going to jail.
80% of all prison inmates came from single mothers' homes.
I did the research. 80% of black males who are in jail come from single mother homes.
We are filling up these prisons with fatherless kids.
Okay, so we're not sure if it's 70% or if it's 80%, if it represents all prisoners, just young men, or only black men. But what we do know is that prisons are full of young men from single mother homes, and the women folk are to blame for it. And this statistic has been copy-pasted across every website for fathers' rights groups and family law attorneys representing fathers. But notice that it's different. It's 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions, not prisoners. But even that claim is wrong. It comes from this 1987 report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And it says across all juveniles in state-operated institutions, 70% of them did not come from a two-parent home, which includes single mothers, but also single fathers, homes where the child was raised by other relatives, and foster homes. In fact, single parents were only 54%, and of that, 48.4% were single mother households. But it's important to remember that this is 35-year-old data about juveniles in juvenile institutions, not prisons. And they only surveyed about 10% of juveniles, so while it might be indicative, it should not be taken as a concrete fact. Now, the statistics on inmates are actually fairly easy to get, thanks again to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And in 2002, they showed that the number of offenders from single mother homes actually dropped from 41 to 39%, and went back up in 2016 to 41.1%. Meanwhile, homes with a father represented 40.7% of all offenders. It's almost neck and neck. So while prisons may not be overflowing with offenders from single mother households, it does represent an elevated risk about 2 to 3 times. And since your lifetime incarceration risk is about 5%, what that means is instead of 70% of children raised by single mothers going to jail, actually well over 80% will avoid ever seeing a jail. Okay, but that still means that single mums offer the worst outcomes, right? Well, studies have also looked at incarceration rates for different household types. And they did again find that 3 times risk for single mother households. And you can see that when we adjust for social, educational, and economic disparity, that risk drops to about 2 times. But before single fathers start to crow about this, look what happens when dad gets a new partner. They offer some of the worst outcomes. And when we remove the economic advantage that single fathers often have, you can see that single fathers with a new partner offer the worst outcomes, beating out single mothers with stepfathers, and even children not raised by either parent. So if we really care about childhood outcomes, we need to be teaching men not to ignore their children the minute a new woman shows up. And even if we just want to focus on improving the outcomes for single mother households, then we need to talk about what causes them, which is absentee fathers. Because absentee fathers are a huge problem. Anywhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of all fathers have no contact with any of their children. And this is often framed as, oh, my baby mother or my B of an ex-wife doesn't let me see the kids. But that's also not true, because when we look only at men with high levels of custody, 40%, almost half of those who start out with weekly contact, virtually abandon their children within 8 years, having little to no contact. And studies have looked into the risk factors for father abandonment, and found that once again top of the list is fathers who have a new partner. And if they have a child with that new partner, then virtually all of them abandon their previous children. So if we really care about improving childhood outcomes, then we need to stop talking about single mothers and instead talk about the disgusting attitudes and behaviors in fathers that treat their children as disposable.
Did y'all hear all that? I know it was a lot.
We did. Can you pull up those stats? We can go by this line item by line item. But I can't just take what he said.
Absolutely. But let's talk about let's talk about what we can take. The new woman in their life, because we've all seen it. We don't need stats for that.
What I've seen is
we do not need stats.
I got 2.
When the new woman comes in town, daddy leaves town.
So I got two examples that shine into my head, and that yes, they are anecdotal, but according to the men on the internet, they seem to be kind of prevalent, right? That what tends to happen is the childhood alienation happens when the father gets a new woman because the mother, if she's not over him, now doesn't want him to solidify having a family with her and creates conflict and does the parental alienation thing. Then the custody agreements become an issue. I've heard throughout time that when men be like, well, if you want to keep contact with your children, you got to still mess with the mother of the kids. I've heard them say that. I don't think it's a good idea,
So,
but that is the lengths that they've gone through to try and stay in their child's life. I got a lot of men that be like
right. So
really,
Marcus.
really hurt about not being able to be around their kids.
So
I know
Marcus.
two right offhand.
Let me just say this. The one thing that can get a woman from having her child is child alienation. If you look at every state, when a man is granted custody of a kid, it's because the woman kept him from his child. If you go look at any court case, when a woman keeps the child, the number one argument is alienation. And that's usually when the father is granted the rights.
So there's two definitions of alienation that are happening in these scenarios, right? There's the legal definition that has legal repercussions, and then there's like the social aspect of it, right? So the legal definition is what you can prove in court of not allowing visitation, of trying to swap things around, manipulating the time. But in terms of the social aspect, that looks like speaking ill of the father so that child does not want to, right? The child is advocating for themselves because of what the mother is feeding the child, right? That can't really be proven in court most times. Most times, if the child is of age to testify, they've already been fed so many lines and so many lies from the mother that it turns the child away from wanting to spend time with the father. So it's two different definitions of alienation that we're talking about. And often when I hear the men talk about it, it tends to be the latter and not the legal definition of alienation.
There's literally a video circulating right now online where it's a man and a woman and the baby is in the bed. And the mother is telling the child, look at him. He did something to you. We don't like him because he did something to you. And she's reinforcing that idea. And the guy was recording it so he can use it in court. Now, I'm not saying all women are saying
absolutely.
stuff like
that does happen. And this guy right here, he actually did a video on that because he pulls stats on how often that does happen. And he actually said that whenever a woman does that, most of the time, the court usually sees through that and then offers the custody to this, because people, these are you get experts with this. You know what I'm saying? These aren't people just off the street. Most of the time, if it's a good courtroom, they can, if it's not adding up, it just is what it is. And he actually came and said that there are a lot of women who do that, not as many as, it's not like this grand percentage, obviously, but the women who normally do that, the man ends up getting custody of the kids.
All the people I know, that didn't happen with them.
So a lot of people who went to court. So a lot of your friends who went to court and the woman said that they abused their kids.
So first of all, it's not a lot. I don't know that many people who don't have like real access to their kids, but the ones that I do know, right, just offhand, the mother brought the issues of the relationship between her and the father and dumped that on the child and tried to make the child choose sides, which she did because the father was moving on to get married, and she to this day is still not talking to the father.
So that sounds like one case. You sound like you're talking about one incident. Are you talking about multiple incidents? Or are you talking about one incident?
All the people that I know that have custody battles right now, right? They're either in a position where they're being bent over and doing exactly what the woman wants them to do so that they can still have access to the child, or they've been completely removed out of the situation and they're trying to fight for some form of custody. Be it she moved to another state and then filed the petition in the new state she moved in, and it's 6 to 8 hours away. Like it's different. So when people talk about why should you get married, getting married prevents this. But when people don't have a solidified relationship, the father can be alienated extremely easily. Like extremely easy, because he don't have guaranteed custody and rights like how a husband would. I'm
Oh,
not saying I
absolutely. We know
don't
that.
have a lot of experience with those type of cases, but the ones I do know, that's been the
And
result.
I do know that women are evil. But what I'm saying to you, you cannot sit here and have me believe majority of the men, not the good fathers, because I know that there are great fathers who go to court for their kids. Those are the ones who are trying to do right. We're not talking about those men. You're telling me about majority of the men who don't have their kids. It's because she said that he abused. There was abuse or some type of involved.
I personally know the story, right? And it's not, I don't know a large amount of people, right? That's why I said it's anecdotal at best. But in the instances that I've been privy to and witnessed, it's either been abuse or it's been just claims to try and knock the father's character into question to ensure that they maintain custody.
Again, Marcus, you're not the only one to have seen it or heard it.
But we're talking about majority. So this happens all this meaning if you had 10 friends who are not married, you're saying majority of those men have gone through this experience.
I'm saying the friends that I have, I can only think of 2 cases where this is a thing. And because most of my friends are either in relationships or married, but the 2 that are not, well, and the one he's actually remarried, and that was the first story I told. And the second one is and he's been through it with 2 different women. And they one of them was with him while he was going through it with the first one and seeing how much it broke him down and vowed to never do that to him, and then did it to him. And I don't even be with the gender war. I'm just talking about the things that I specifically witnessed.
Right. Well, so and I'm not because I think you've told me this. I'm not knocking his story. I do believe that this has happened to him. But what I'm saying to you is when you take one story, you're like, oh, this happens. It makes it seem like it's the majority of what's going on. You understand what I'm saying?
I get you. That's why I'm making an argument. I'm not saying it's the majority. What I'm saying is what I've experienced. But if it were to just be in court statistics, or you let her explain the story, it would seem as though he just abandoned the kid.
Right. And it for what I know from the people that I know, and it's similar to Marcus, most of the men that I know actually are in their kids' lives with the woman. But in the 2 that are in my mind right now, one of which ended up having to pay almost $17,000 to see his kid, and it took almost a year in worth of court. And the other one doesn't have the money to fight, and she won't allow him. And it's not as simple as, okay, let's just file a petition in family court. Like it's much more involved than that. And then there's so much you have to prove to first even start getting visitation. Like this is one of those things where I'm passionate about. I'm not going to argue to do stats. I don't know the prison stats. I'm not going to do that. But the case he tries to make for women, I just haven't seen it. I've never seen it.